I'm Patrick Watson, I'm an astrologer, and you're watching Big Fat Astro Vlog live. And today I'm going to be talking about what Venus Retrograde means for you if you have Leo rising. Here we go. So let's talk a little bit about first what Venus means typically. So Venus typically means like bringing things together, bringing people together, harmonizing people, and harmonizing things. Like, you know, this is why it's associated with like music and art and beauty and poetry and like making things nice and harmonious. It's about social etiquette, social norms, social boundaries, social bonds. So it's not just like romance and love. It can also be about the interrelationships of groups of people, whether that's like races or classes or religions. But this is typically how Venus works, like just regularly. When Venus goes retrograde, that's when it kind of starts doing these things, but in slightly strange ways. So, for example, if you have two people who are together in a committed, exclusive relationship, you know, that's sort of what we typically expect of Venus. Well, when Venus goes retrograde, it might add another person to that equation. So, you know, oftentimes Venus retrogrades are associated with, you know, scandals, especially those of a romantic or sexual nature. So that's like one pretty common theme. And in fact, if you look even right now with Venus just about to station retrograde in a couple of days, you know, this news has been nonstop about these sexual assault allegations against this Supreme Court nominee. And so it's brought this whole topic of like the violation of, you know, social norms and the issue of not just of intimacy, but of like, you know, intimacy in a completely you know, sordid context, and this is partly due to the Venus Mars square as well. But with Venus going retrograde, it's really kind of amping up this, you know, feeling that like, you know, people who have had this trauma happen to them are not being treated, you know, fairly equitably, and you know, there's you know, this great sort of upswell of this feeling of the moment, of, you know, that I think is sort of captured very well by Venus retrograde. So yeah, that's kind of what we are looking at least for this one. So anyway, so that's kind of what Venus means on the kind of broader scale. But let's take it down to what Venus means on sort of a more individual level. So well, as individuals we can get. So if you were born with Leo rising, we know that Venus has two very specific roles in your chart. So on the one hand, Venus rules Libra, which means that Venus represents issues related to sometimes like your siblings, your friends, people who are like family, but it also contains notions of mobility, going about town, your local neighborhood, short distance travel, as well as school, especially like elementary, rather than like college or something, maybe like high school, has some of those associations with education and learning and studying, and some of these more slightly mercurial things associated with the third that I think comes from the moon's joy in the third. But anyway, so the Venus has some say over that part of your life. Now, Venus also rules Taurus, and Taurus is your, more or less like your career, your reputation, the notion of authority and bosses, your public life, what's sort of publicly available about you. So these topics can be connected in, you know, interesting ways. So that's what Venus typically has something to say about for all Leo risings. Now, what we can say is Venus is currently transiting through your fourth house and is about to station retrograde, which it will do on October 5th. So we can see how when we go, when we go just like 1 day ahead, 2 days ahead, yeah, see Venus turns red in solar fire. So you can see that it's turned retrograde there. So that happens on October 5th. So what this means is this could be some I mean, this could be a few things, but if we start with like the third house, if we think of what the third house typically represents, and then what happens when its ruler is, going askew, going awry, going backward, this could be some sort of drama to do with, if you have siblings, and it could be drama to do with them. But if you don't have siblings, if you just have friends you're close with, you have friends of the family or people who are like family to you, this can be some social boundaries which are crossed. And these don't have to necessarily be sexual ones. I mean, it could just be like, a big blow up which causes, the breakdown, dissolution of those bonds. Now, it could also be making connections with friends that are improper. Or otherwise, connections you wouldn't otherwise make. So, for example, this is probably like, this might be like someone who maybe, starts thirst tweeting, someone who, maybe starts looking back at like previous, exes maybe, and maybe they're just on a friendly basis, but it's really like a connection you shouldn't make as a friend, because of like a history together or because of how you might actually feel about them. So it can be kind of improper associations, people you normally wouldn't have a connection with, or people you normally wouldn't, be on a friendly basis with. You may form kind of a special connection, at least in this time, from like October 5th through November 16th, I think, is when Venus actually stations direct. Now, if we think of it in terms of the 10th house, this is like your career and reputation. So with Venus going retrograde, ruling the sign of your 10th, that could be, that could either be like a change of job. It could also be something which changes your reputation or scandalizes you, because Venus is normally saying good things about you, but maybe when Venus is going retrograde, like there's some controversy or gossip or something it might not, doesn't have to be bad necessarily, but I would think with Venus crossing your 10th, that might, or rather Venus either crossing your 10th retrograde or ruling your 10th and retrograde, there's going to be times when like you could be scandalized or do things which otherwise reflect poorly on you. And maybe this has something to do with your associations. Maybe your friendships or your sort of personal connections end up kind of tarnishing your own reputation. Or maybe a really big advancement at work, causes strain with like your brothers or siblings or your friends who feel like, oh, well, you're too good enough now. You're too good for us now, or something like that. I don't know. I mean, there's a million ways it could turn out, because I'm talking about literally millions of people who this applies to. But there's some sort of intersection between this notion of like your career and your reputation, as well as kind of your interpersonal relationships, not just romantic, but like more specifically like your pals, your buddies, your homies. So, and since it's going retrograde through your 4th, it could also involve like your parents, home, private life. Those are the things which are suggested by the 4th house. So that could also be a bit of family drama as well, especially if there's, I don't know, breakups happening or affairs happening. You never quite know until you do. So if you are interested in learning more about what Venus retrograde means to you specifically, I would recommend going back through your, emails or your Facebook posts or what have you, and try to remind yourself what was going on 8 years ago, because you can see Venus is retrograde here. Every 8 years, Venus goes retrograde in the same part of the zodiac. So back in October of 2010, it was there. If we go back 8 years before that, in October of 2002, Venus was retrograde there. Before that, 1994 again, so on. So depending on how old you are, you can look as far back, probably over your life as you want, and you can see if there's any kind of connecting threads between these different episodes from like October, November of these certain years. Usually there is kind of a repeating theme of some sort, and it likely has some relevance for all of the houses involved in this transit. The houses Venus rules, as well as the house that Venus is actually transiting through itself. So if you feel comfortable with letting me know what's happening in your life with this transit, let me know. I'd love to hear. You have the whole month to kind of see what's going on with it. Again, it doesn't actually end until November 16th, but we'll talk about that next month, about what that station will mean for you. So thanks for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.